Hi everyone, my name is Tracy, and today I'm going to be talking about descriptive and narrative writing. First of all, let's compare and contrast descriptive and narrative writing. You could think about descriptive writing as a form of a photograph, where narrative is more like a film. In a film, something actually happens. Like, for example, there's a plot, there are climaxes, there are dialogues, there are characters. In descriptive, nothing really happens, but there are some movements. Like, for example, someone walking down the street, that's a form of movement. Something is happening, but there's no like major plot that's going on in descriptive writing. But for a narrative, it's more like a storyline that's going on. So that is the main difference between descriptive and narrative. Starting with descriptive. So the content and structure for a descriptive writing, band 6 being the highest in the exam board. So it says many well-defined and developed ideas and convincing overall picture with a variety of focuses. What they mean by this is when you're describing a scene, you're going to have many images described in detail. Like, for example, a room. You're not just going to describe a room by itself. You're going to zoom in on like the desk in detail, then you move on to the furniture, then you move on to the bed, for example. So many images in one picture, if you understand what I mean. Then we have style and accuracy. Now this is relevant for any writing that you have. So band 6 again, it's going to be precise and effective vocabulary. You're not going to thesaurus vomit. What I mean by thesaurus vomit is you're not going to take like fancy words to impress the examiner and it doesn't even make sense in your writing. You're using it wrong, for example. That's not going to be effective. That's just going to make you lose so many marks. So you have to make sure that you're using the correct vocabulary in the right context. Then we have range of sentence structures. We're gonna have simple sentences, compound, complex sentences, etc., etc. Then we have almost always accurate grammar. Now, that's really obvious in any writing. Spelling and grammar are always important. For descriptive writing, one of the main features that you're going to be using is figurative language. If you don't know what figurative language means, it's basically any figure of speech, a statement or phrase not intended to be understood literally. Now, there are many examples to figurative language. I've given some of the basic examples. So first we have a simile. It's comparing two things using like or as. Like the example I've given here. He runs as fast as a cheetah. Now, obviously, this person isn't as fast as a cheetah, but it's reinforcing that this person is really fast. We also have metaphor, personification, hyperbole. It's basically extreme exaggeration. Like here, I'm so hungry I could eat a horse. You're not actually going to eat a horse, but it's just emphasizing that you're really hungry. Obviously, there are more figurative languages here. There's so much more figurative language than I've provided, but these are just some basic literary terms that you should know. So for descriptive writing, there isn't a specific structure that you have to follow, but the example I've provided here is really common that students use a lot. So it's called the 5-paragraph structure. For your first paragraph, you're going to zoom out, a long shot where you describe the whole scene. For example, let's say the park. You're going to describe the park as a whole, and then you pick a detail that you're going to return to at the end of your writing. So for example, let's say I pick the sunrise, the sun, as my detail. I'm going to explain why we do this later on. Now, for the second paragraph, we're going to zoom in. We're going to pick one detail. We're going to describe it in depth. Like, for example, from my park example, it's going to be, let's say, people walking in the park with their pets. Let's say I'm going to just I'm going to describe that scene. I'm going to use my sentence structures, I'm going to use my figurative language, and so on and so on. Then I'm going to change perspective. It could be a change in perspective on people, going to change angles, time, etc. And then for the fourth paragraph, it's going to be another detail that we're going to be describing. Let's say for my next example, I'm going to pick the flowers, the field of flowers, and I'm going to describe that in detail. The last paragraph, it's going to be an emotional ending. It's going to circle back to something I mentioned in the first paragraph. So in my first paragraph, I described the sun and the sunrise. Now I'm going to circle back and I'm going to describe the moon instead. It's going to be a sunset now at the same park. So by doing this and returning to a recurring image, it's going to bring a sense of unity and harmony, and it's going to show the examiner that I really thought about the structure and how I'm going to write it effectively. So that's going to help you gain higher marks. So here are my top tips for writing descriptive writing. First, we are going to check that we're using paragraphs correctly, making sure that they flow smoothly to one another, because paragraphs are really important. If you're having trouble thinking about this, just imagine how a camera would move. Let's say the camera is facing the ceiling. It can't just go to, let's say, like the balcony all of a sudden. No, it has to move step by step. Next, we're going to think about tone or atmosphere we're creating. Is it a calming atmosphere? Is it a gloomy one, etc.? Next, we're not going to be narrative. We're going to avoid being narrative. After all, it is a descriptive writing. So we're not going to have characters. We're not going to have a storyline. Nothing's going to happen. Basically going to be observing what's going on. We're gaining marks for having developed imagery. So make sure you describe each scene in detail using the figurative language that we talked about. Next, we're going to be looking at narrative writing. Now, this is a bit different in terms of content and structure. Band 6 here says, plot is well-defined and strongly developed with description, character, setting, and effective climax. Just think about what a good movie would be like. It's going to have a strong plot line. It's going to be interesting, intriguing. Something interesting actually happens in the story. So that's going to be your highest band. Now, obviously, the style that you're going to write is the same. You're going to have a range of sentence structures. You will have some elements of descriptive, but it's not the main thing that you're going to focus on. Grammar and spelling are always important. The structure that you're going to generally have is similar to what you would have in a book or a film. First, there's going to be an introduction where you introduce the time, the setting, the characters. You introduce your character's motivation and what they want, what they're going to achieve in the story. Then we're going to have an inciting event. This is an event that begins the main action of the plot. It's usually an obstacle that prevents the main character from achieving what they want. Now we're going to have rising tension, where we build tension as the story begins to reach its climax, often has misunderstandings and conflict. Then we're going to have the climax, where it is the most intense or exciting part of the story. It could be physical, like a fight, or it could be emotional, like an argument, etc., etc. Then we finally have resolution, where the conclusion of the story is after the climax. Often it answers any final questions that the story has not told yet, or your story could end with a cliffhanger, but never end with questions unanswered. That's not going to make your plot well defined, and your examiner is going to be really confused. And never end your story with, oh, it was all a dream. Examiners hate that so much. Now, something that you have to keep in mind when you're writing about narrative, characterization, and your setting. When you're thinking about characterization, to keep in mind of these questions. The appearance of the character. What do they look like? How do they dress? Their actions. How do they walk? How do they move? Do they smile a lot? Do they frown? Speech. How do they speak? Do they speak quietly, loudly, confidently? Do they have an accent? Are they talkative? Are they shy? What are their motivations? What are their goals? As for setting basically means where your story is set and when your story is set. Is it set in modern day or is it 50 years ago? It is important that your reader understands the sense of atmosphere and the sense of setting in your writing. And it is recommended that you use a more unique setting to make your reader a little bit more interested. Here are the top tips that we have for narrative writing. First, we're going to think about how to interest and intrigue the reader in shaping your narrative. Now, like I said, just think about your favorite book or your favorite movie. You obviously like it because it's really interesting and it intrigues you as a reader. You're going to do the same for narrative writing. Consider imaginative ways to tell your story apart from a chronological account. The structure I gave about the plot is quite literally the basic plot that you're going to follow. You can obviously add more stuff. Like for example, you can add a flashback, squeeze in the future, or maybe you can end it off with a cliffhanger. Like I said, you have to make it more interesting. Then you're going to develop your character's thoughts and feelings to help engage with the reader. You're not going to, in your writing, you're not going to be like, oh, this happened, now this happened, now this happened. It's not going to make your narrative writing really interesting. So try to include the character's feelings and thoughts as well. Check your writing for errors which will affect your mark. Obviously need to check your writing. Silly mistakes like grammar or spelling are going to let your grade down, so make sure that you check your writing all the time. If you are using complicated vocabulary, fancy words from the thesaurus or the dictionary, make sure you understand how you use them and make sure it's not out of the blue. Make sure they actually make sense in the sentence. Sometimes simple words that are clear to the examiner are really powerful. I'm not saying you have to use simple sentence all the time, but sometimes simple sentence can be quite effective. That's why using ranges of sentences are really important. So that was my explanation on descriptive and narrative writing. I hope it was helpful. And thank you for listening. Bye bye.